Hello everyone and welcome back for the JOJOLands Chapter 24 review. So we have an intense and dense chapter this month that continues to build up the conflict on Howler's yacht, reaching what feels like the climax and the start of Howler's downfall. So I was honestly surprised by just how much was in this chapter, especially after the intensity of last month. I thought Shirley would be stepping away from the boat scene, letting that tension fall, and see the other stand users who had confronted Meryl. But nope, Araki just continued to go pedal to the metal on Jodio versus Howler here for the entire first half of the chapter, which after this scene, you think it's been a whole chapter, and then we get a Paco flashback in the second half. So really good stuff, and let's get right into the breakdown. Starting with the cover page, we have a Dragona illustration referencing Jodio's pose with their hands up, although there's the double meaning there as Dragona is also being held at gunpoint with their back up against the wall, as we can see some bullet holes in the background. Just some light foreshadowing for what's in store, and it's cool to see the siblings share a pose. And turning the page, we are welcomed into the chapter with a double page spread. I feel like I say that every review. Does Araki really always start with spreads? I guess so. So within the first couple pages, we pick up right where we left off with Howler discovering the fragments of a deteriorated lava rock, which was being held by Dragona, and was exposed to so much cash it started to break down. And this is something Howler had seen before in Letrado's will, in the last chapter with the flashback, with his family's rocks, so he quickly catches onto them and what they're using. And for one reason or another, this discovery makes Howler go berserk, sweating profusely, screaming, shooting blindly in the direction of Jodio, who's whispering to Dragona, and even pointing his gun at Key West and the boat crew, showing that Howler is incredibly on edge and no longer trusts anyone. And this anger that Howler is expressing seems to go a little bit deeper than just the fear of losing Hualalai. It's almost like he's insulted that someone is using his family's power against him, and it's humiliating him. We then get an inner monologue from Howler telling us that he's certain that this has all been a result of the lava rock, and describes its power as the alteration of the flow of money and operates through a series of movements, which is something we are familiar with. But he also says he doesn't know the exact shape or form it's in, and this connects back to one of Howler's earlier dialogues where he was asking Lulu to retrieve the enemy's lava rock, but said he didn't know exactly how big or what color it was. So it would seem that since Howler's first experience with Letrado's will, he has either encountered or learned about more lava rocks that take on different shapes that are different colors, or could even be processed into different forms, which is maybe something that will be explored later on. So Howler, looking for our crew's lava rock, begins to dump cash all over the ground, and instantly a few stacks stick to Dragona. So Howler drags them onto the rest of the money, and Jodio and Charmy quickly realize how bad the situation has turned, and if they don't do something, they'll be exposed. So they try and distract Howler by informing him that Dragona, who he's been calling a woman, is actually a man, which somewhat surprises Howler, although he's so enraged he just ignores them still calling Dragona a woman, maybe thinking they're just lying to distract him, or he doesn't even care, just completely focused on the rock. So certainly an interesting move by Jodio here. He must have thought this would have gotten more of a reaction out of Howler, but instead imparted more of a reaction onto the readers. Because as we know, anytime the topic of Dragona's gender comes up, it's always handled very gracefully by the community. So I guess just take from this scene what you will, but ultimately it shouldn't change whatever your interpretation of Dragona's gender already was, as Jodio has always seen Dragona as his big brother who likes girl fashion. It's how he described them in chapter 1, while those who don't know Dragona, going by appearances, call them a woman. So I don't see how this interaction really changes anything or makes their situation any less ambiguous. But that would of course change if we hear from Dragona themselves, and the discrepancy is part of their development. So moving on, Howler continues to press Dragona but finds no evidence of the lava rock. As we saw earlier, when Jodio was whispering in their ear, he was actually working out a plan for Dragona to use smooth operators to turn all of the bills into counterfeits. Apparently smooth operators can work really quickly and affect a lot of things, essentially removing all of the value from the bills, making the rock ignore them, which also stops it from deteriorating. But this only bought us a little bit of time, as we see that Howler is still intent on searching everyone, and Jodio has the rock. But this is interrupted by an absurdity, as earlier when Howler had fired randomly into the wall of the boat, he had hit electrical wiring and started a fire that has been visible from the outside and attracted the attention of fire and police boats that are now surrounding the yacht. And this absurdity creates the perfect opportunity for our gang to pressure Howler, with Charmy saying that these boats aren't just coming for the fire, it's the government coming for your ass, Howler, they're gonna seize the yacht, and Jodio steps up and almost intentionally reveals himself as the enemy in one final move against Howler. As in this situation, Jodio was just supposed to be an assistant and bag carrier who's been keeping quiet for the entire conflict, just quietly instructing the others from the background, like telling Charming Men what to say, as him posing as Yokohama is supposed to be the one with authority. But now Jodio is screaming at Howler to sign the documents and says nobody can fight the movement of money, almost like he's subtly telling Howler that he can't win because they have the power of the lava rock, which is proving to be true, as it was the lava rock that gave them this upper hand. The fact that Howler shot the electrical wires and it started a fire and is now being surrounded by authorities was absolutely a movement, and we don't know if it's actually the government or not, but all the rock had to do was to give agency to its holder through an absurdity, and this now puts Howler in a 50-50. Either sign these documents that offer a possibility of getting your land back, at least that's how he perceives the deal, or risk facing the government, who would certainly take Hualalai forever. And that's where this scene leaves off, which is excellent progression and honestly better than most of the stand fights so far, seeing the characters outsmart Howler and adapt to the situation, playing the role of these bank employees, which makes this arc kind of feel like the Beetle tendency of Part 9, where you have a bunch of stand users in a room not using their stands, or at least not letting the other person know they're cheating with a stand to solve the problem. And I think that leads into the question, if Howler truly does feel cornered in this situation and thinks he could be losing Hualalai, don't you think he would use his stand, regardless of its ability, no matter how strong or weak or obscure it is? Shouldn't he at least try something rather than just let his life fall apart? And since Howler has such a strong connection to these lava rocks and Hualalai, values imprinted in him from a young age, you'd think his stand would have some connection to those concepts. And from the brief glimpse of it we saw before, it even looks like Hualalai and the lava tubes. So maybe he'll use his stand as an ace in the hole in the final moments to get out from the situation, which could also give us those main villain vibes of encountering their stand early on but not defeating them, and maybe just getting a peek into its ability. So now in the second half of the chapter, we switch scenes over to the school where Paco and Usagi are going to help Meryl, although we are first given a Paco flashback, where we learn his father was an immigrant that came to Hawaii from Mexico to work at a poultry farm, although was neglectful and abusive towards young Paco, with his mother completely out of the picture. Although, despite his father being an abusive drunk, Paco still loved and cared for him, and even developed his stand from a young age to sort of ward off the abuse, being able to tense his muscles. And when Paco was older, he had to turn to crime in order to raise money to pay for a lawyer to help out his father, who had been trialed for murder, who passed out drunk on the side of the road and woke up to a dead man on top of him with a knife in his back and his prints all over it. So Paco had to start funding the legal expenses, and this started out as purse snatching but turned into forging checks that he could cash thanks to his ability, although he was caught just after passing 10K, but I guess wasn't convicted of anything because he was a minor, but did have to drop out of school. We then see Paco turn into mafia and loan sharks to raise money, although he's dissuaded from continuing this life by Meryl, who approaches him with an opportunity to leave behind his father and tells him that those mafia guys were actually the ones that framed him for murder and have been using Paco's love for his father to exploit him. So Meryl offers Paco the chance to leave this life behind, come finish school, and work for her instead, which he does thankfully. And seeing this flashback with the context of chapter 13, where Jodio and Dragona had a similar encounter, we can see that Meryl is essentially the Bruno of this part, a leader and organizer that seeks those out that are either being exploited or at their lowest or just have no one else to turn to, and offers them a new lease on life with new opportunities, even if it is still crime related. So we have those part 5 elements of fundamentally good people living in immoral circumstances. And I got a great comment over on my live reaction for the chapter of someone saying that this backstory reminded them of Narancia, how he cared so much for someone, they ended up using it against him. So coming out from the flashback, we have Paco and Usagi approaching Meryl's office when a faculty member tells us that she just stepped out with some police folk, causing our boys to panic and run inside only to find the aftermath of Nimbo's attack, with Meryl's fingers scattered all across the floor, which is where the chapter leaves off. So during these final pages, you'll notice that Usagi specifically is extremely upset by this, brought to tears seeing that Meryl's been hurt, so we can expect that Usagi, similar to Paco, has a backstory where Meryl helped him, but maybe in a much more personal way, and he sees her more like family than an employer. But this also extends to Paco, who feels similar, saying that he'll kill the bastards that took her. And I wonder if these emotions will extend to Jodio and Dragona. When they find out something happened to her, maybe they'll get a little bit more emotional on the yacht and have this whole facade begin to unravel and really turn things into chaos. And that's going to wrap up my thoughts on the latest chapter, and due to the other JoJo related events in April, JOJOLands will unfortunately be on hiatus next month, but returning in May. So in April, we have JoJo Day on the 12th, the very special JoJo anime related event, and Araki is also releasing a new Thus Spoke Rohan Kishibe, episode 12 Bruschetta, in April of Ultra Jump. That will be a 51-page story, so we are still getting Araki manga next month. And I love bruschetta, one of my favorite dishes, so I'm looking forward to the new Rohan adventure. And when JoJoLands returns in May, there will also be a new issue of JoJo Magazine, the summer issue. So these next 2 months are going to be crazy packed with JoJo content, and I'll be covering as much as I can, so be sure to subscribe and stick around to catch it all. But for now, like the video if you enjoyed it, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.